What is up, everyone? Pittsburgh Weiss Schwarz coming at you with something a little bit different today. I'm joined today by Andy and Tanner, who you have met before.
Hey, everyone.
What's up?
And today we will be doing a BCS slash Bro 2022 meta primer. We felt pretty bad. We weren't able to get out all those rush rundowns. Really hard to, move and prepare to play in BSF and BRO and BCS and also make stuff like that that's really highly edited and clean and stuff like that. But I wanted to get something out there to make sure that you guys are ready for Bro and BCS. Bro being this weekend. So if you're playing in that tomorrow, starting tomorrow, it might even be starting tonight, depending on your time zone. I don't know exactly how that's work out. But these are some of the decks that you'll expect to see. We are going to run down sort of the big meta threats that you'll probably see, barring, like stuff we don't know anything about, like AOT that's going to release mid-season. And then we kind of got this cool thing going on. We're going to take sort of deck strength, going off some recent tier lists that were made by other content creator groups, and then plotting that against what we think is like the perceived popularity of what you'd expect to see. And then we're going to talk about it a little bit. So
basically what you're telling me is if you want to win this weekend at Bro, watch the whole video.
Yeah, that'll probably help if you don't know literally everything about every deck already. Which
I hear it's good luck too if you subscribe and like the video.
That
helps you cancel.
Helps you cancel. That'd be nice if it worked that way, huh? All right.
I will use all my alt accounts and like the video.
All right, so we're gonna hop right into it. Gonna start out with the obvious one, 8 Standby Mushoku Tensei. It's the biggest board focused deck that we have running around. It has the highest consistency of almost any standby deck ever. 8 Standby strategy. It has that 1/0 Roxy pendant that can just foolish burial stuff right out of deck or filter their hand for counters or whatever they need. The 1/1 Heiress is like the most completely ridiculous standby card that they've ever printed. The fact that it rips their hand back on their first turn after they play it means that even if these ridiculously large walls gets cleared, which are usually 7/5, 8/5, 9/5, if they get two lanes down, because they're getting that cigarettes on play where they get their hand back immediately, they're just gonna have enough steam to go for another sacky kind of rebuild because they're always giving out twin drives. So every time they go to attacks, even if you've broken their board and you've picked off 1 or 2 things every turn, they can sort of still have the gas to slam down cards, play more heiresses, get more cards, give more twin drive, and try to sack into an even bigger board, even when you're clearing them off. So the deck is really, really resilient. And to make matters worse, because of the way the 1/1 Heirs combo works, they're pretty much always going to have that 2k counter, even though most lists only run 1 or 2. They're all running anti-change counter, which is a pay 3, back a card in their board, anti-change to waiting room, and they're all running tap. So you're going to have to play around those 3 different defensive counters if you queue into this. That 3/2 Ghislaine at the top end. Can't play events or backups as long as they have a full field. Remember that one. Your opponent has to have a full field. If you manage to memory kick another lane or something like that, that effect turns off. They don't get the power, and they don't get the anti-event, anti-backup. But if they do have their full board like they usually will, you can't interact with it at all. And again, because of the way how that Roxy pendant functions, where they play it, they search, they ditch, and then when they level up, they pop it out of their memory and search again. You can basically expect them to have whatever threat they need whenever they need it every game. So instead of like tracking their grave all the time for those specific counters, of course you should track your opponent's grave for as many things as you can all the time, but you should always expect them to have their defensive counters, blowout tools ready to go because of how that Roxy pendant works. Anybody have any additional things to add about MTI?
I have a couple things.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just going off the thing you said about counters, since we're already talking about that, I think we were talking about this a little bit before we started the video, just kind of how like the counter lineups we're playing are kind of different now than they were even just a few months ago. With a lot of the top tier decks opting to run anti-change counters now, when a few months ago everyone was running like tap counters, memory kick counters. So definitely like be aware, don't get got by memory kick counters, or I mean anti-change counters. Make sure like sequence your attacks properly, and that goes for like any deck.
I think a lot of decks out there are running like a really big suite of defensive counters because as decks get more slot efficient, they can run more of those. So like it's more common to see like decks running anti-change and tap like Mushoku or Hololive or memory kick and anti-change or like
I was gonna say, like even if you see that, like definitely before your opponent refreshes, always check their waiting room, see what counters they have out, ask them every time before you ask them how many climaxes are going back, ask them how many counters counters they have going back and which ones, you know, because it's probably not unheard of at all for someone to just run, you know, running one anti-change counter, one tap counter, and then just like a second tap counter. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just to like where you say always expect them to have it, even if you saw that they were out them before, they might just choose to be playing an extra copy because it's a very slot efficient deck.
When I say that, I mean to say that if you haven't seen it in some way, expect them to have it anyway because of the way their deck works. If they don't have it in their hand and you have the chance of leveling them up and they have a Roxy Pendant in memory, they could have that counter live on your second or third swing because of how the deck works. They can kind of like mid-combat rip a counter out, and then, you know, you're randomly playing around the anti-change counter mid-combat step, which can be pretty annoying. But yeah,
that's a really good point. Yeah,
8 Standby Mushoku Tensei is like one of the most disgusting decks they've ever made. I don't know what else I can say about it. Tanner, you got any in?
Yeah, I think the most frustrating thing is if you send them to level 3 and you don't kill them right away, and you know you have your own defensive counters if you're playing, you know, like a Hololive, or you're not going to be able to do anything because they're just going to field their Galanes or field 2 Galanes and anything else, and they'll attack with the Galanes first, and you can't tap, you can't do anything to them. So just knowing that the Galanes are always going to be a threat just to shut down all of your defensive options is just the icing on the cake as they win board most game, as they have these ways to just disrupt your attacks and dissuade you from doing specific things.
Yeah, it might even be good to go for, if you're playing Hololive specifically or something like that, you go for like an early tap, like if you have the resources to do so, like a tap at 2
really good point, yeah,
or something like that, because you will not get a chance to do it if a Shogun player gets to 3. But that's contextual depending on how the game's going, how the damage is falling. And,
yeah, it's just so easy to like, it's not always easy to play around like a tap counter or something, but if you have one of your lanes shrouded up like the Ghislaine is, then it becomes a lot easier to just ignore your opponent's like tap counters. They just swing with the Ghislaine first, maybe side attack with something else, and then it doesn't even matter in the last lane. I guess one other point I wanted to make about Mushoku, I know we've kind of been on this deck for a while now, but this is like probably the best deck in the format, or like it's
a lot of people think so. Yeah,
it's up there. A lot of people think it is, without a doubt, like top tier. So definitely something you're going to be expecting to see. I think part of the reason that makes the deck so oppressive and so powerful and why it's performed so well is specifically the 1/1 Eris combo, which Carmen was gushing about earlier. A lot of times when we've seen like 8 standby decks that have like a plussing combo at level 1, right? Like before, when you had 8 standby decks, they would usually not have like a plussing level 1 combo. They would kind of just like forego having a level 1 combo and just set up pieces and set up their board, right? But when you did have like a plussing level 1 combo, a lot of times it'd be something like Bunny Girl Senpai, or if you play the Japanese side of the game, you've seen our videos on Love Live Nijigasaki, where there's that level 1 combo that's like a cigarettes on attack or whatever. But the thing that separates this Eris from those other like 1/0 plussing combos off of standby is the fact that it's the slot efficiency, like Carmen says. The fact that your level 1 plussing combo is off of a card that you inherently want to be standbying to field, as opposed to like a shitty little 1/0 that's not very beefy and is just going to get run over and doesn't play into your overall strategy, right? You would see decks like Love Live Nijigasaki in Japan, right? They would just they would run the standby but not even run the combo because
they don't have the slots for it.
Yeah, they'd rather have the 1/1. So you don't have to pick and choose with Mushoku. Get your plussing combo and your big beefy target.
I think there is nothing more frustrating than when you sit down against Mushoku, you crack their board every single turn over and over and over, and they are hard playing Erises from hand and like brainstorming. They're canceling, they're hitting brainstorms, and they're playing Eris combo multiple turns like a 1k1 deck, and it's actually enough because the 1/1 Eris is so stupid, and the twin drive gives them that chance, like I was saying, to just always sack into a bigger board, even if you break it down over and over and over. I played even Danmachi into 8 standby Mushoku a decent amount with one of our locals, Zach, and like it's really infuriating to be like, okay, I stun the card you standbyed out, I beat over your board, and then they like hit a brainstorm, slam down 2 more Erises and like a level 0, clear 2 of your lanes, and then tell you have to clear them again, and then you do it again, and they do the same thing, and again, and the same thing. And then at the top, they put down 2 Ghislaines like they always do anyway. Like, it just doesn't matter because the Heiress is so good. Like, because she refills their hand on the first turn. It's not like traditional standby decks where they have to win on board to recoup their hand. Like, even Dow had to do that. They recoup their hand and went on board at the same time.
Because that was a big weakness of like the 8 standby all-in board archetypes before, is like if you could rush them, or if they just didn't hit standbys and could never set up their field, then they could just be stranded with like no resources. But Eris just solves all those problems just by being the big beefy standby target herself and the combo, that it just does so much for the deck.
Thankfully, we do have decks like Danmachi and a couple other things that are gonna give 8 standby Mushoku a little bit more like of a check in the fall season as opposed to the Springfest season, where I think it was pretty like uncontested. Everybody thought Mushoku was just the far and away the best thing. So yeah, I mean,
actually, that brings me to another point. I know we've been on this deck for talking about it for so long.
It's really important. I don't have any time necessity.
Yeah, knowing that like this deck is so omnipresent in tournaments, you know, it's something that you always have to watch out for. I mean, if in the trios event, that should have been really telling, right? In all the trios events we've had, it like in the spring and early summer, or like literally every single team had a Mushoku on it. But I know that this deck, then they got a ban in or a choice restriction in JP, right?
Yes, they did. It was the tap counter and the 2/2 Ghislaine, which hit it right where it needed to be hit, in my opinion.
And I will say that, you know, while the English ban list is not very broad at this point, we did recently, you know, get a restriction list for the first time in English, like last year. And Data Live, which was the standby deck that, you know, flew too close to the sun, kind of got smacked down. And I think that 8 standby Mushoku, considering how high of representation it has and the results it's getting, you know, we could probably expect that ban to come at some point to English as well.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think that the way that Bushi C is going to handle the initial English ban list is how the Japanese ban list handled past, where if there were any restrictions of trios season, they were typically light and like small corrections, and big ban lists always came after fall, if there were even any restrictions from trio season at all. But I do think that if we see any heavy ones, they're going to come from the fall results as opposed to Springfest results. So, but we'll see.
I think with that too, I think you can pretty much, I think this deck's going to have just as much representation essentially as we saw before. It's still going to be by far and away in the top, you know, top 3 of decks, and I think we can expect it to put up some results. So I think that it's pretty, I would say it's pretty safe to say after this season to expect the same or a similar choice between those cards.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah,
that won't be till after the season. So I think for this season, I don't think there's going to be an emergency ban because there wasn't during Springfest when it had 80% rep across teams. So
yeah, and who knows? I mean, since the team events and stuff were going on, you know, we've had a lot of new decks enter the fray. Right, like HOL Alive kind of entered
at the end,
Springfest like about halfway through, so it obviously didn't have the number of results as Mushoku because it wasn't out for the first half of it. And the Quince deck too. Quince getting their second set recently. Again, that deck getting a shot in the arm is really going to like add another big standby deck to the metagame, like help combat this.
Yeah, especially a standby deck that hates on other big board decks.
Yeah, so like if you own Mushoku and you're worried about a ban, like who knows, maybe it won't actually come, right? Like maybe the format will sort itself out with, you know, the new decks that are being added, right? Something like Data Live went like really unopposed for a very long time and it got hit.
I think Mushoku will get checked, but I don't think it's going anywhere. I think your investment is still very sound if you're someone who picked up Mushoku with the intent to bring it to tournament. You will not be upset that this was the deck that you chose to bring. I will say that much. This is still a great pick, and even if they slap that same restriction on it, it's still a good deck.
Mm-hmm.
So
because I know with Data Live, right? Data Live standby is like non-existent.
Oh well, that thing got murdered. That thing got gutted. Yeah.
They again with how they banned this deck in JP, it was done in a way that the deck is still able to function. It's just not overly oppressive like it was.
Yeah, you have to decide between being able to sack out a bigger and bigger board with the 2/2 with the global power and your like top end defensive like capability. Because outside of the 3/2 lane, what you got to realize about Mushoku, they don't have any other healers, so they use tap counter and anti-change counter to like offset the fact that they don't heal at 2 or anything, and they don't like extend the game in that way. So if you lose the tap counter and all you have is your healers is Ghislaine, and like you got to use the anti-change counter, which is still costly, like at 2 every game, you know, that opens up a lot more holes if it gets the same restriction. But I don't know. Who knows if it even will. But I think we are safe to move on. Now, these are in no particular order. I have, for everyone's sanity, interspliced the different Hololive decks in between other decks that we have here, so as to not make us go insane. But I want to start talking about Kanata because I think that's the Hololive list that is like on the most steam right now. Tanner, I think you'd agree. It's the thing people are talking about the most. Okay, so it's definitely the most versatile Hololive list. So the way that this deck works is similar to the Rushia deck, if you're familiar with that. We talked a lot about a lot of lists already on the channel, but as a quick recap here, it plays entirely for the level 2 onwards. You don't play a level like 0 or level 1 climax combo at all. And to make sure you keep up your hand and make sure you get to 2 first, because Kanata is pretty small on offense, you want to make sure you get to do 2 first to get those out. They play 12 self-clocking effects, like somewhere between 9 to 12 self-clock effects, to just make sure that they can just cut themselves all the way up to 2, so that they can put out their Kanatas, recoup their resources, and like grind out the game from there. And then of course, once they hit 3, as long as they have 4 stock, you have to watch out for triple Marine, because that card's really cool. So efficient that you need absolutely nothing for it to go off. I think you need like a Marine and 2 other cards in hand, and you can probably triple combo, because it digs for 12 cards or something like that and gets everything out there, combined with your drawing your clock.
Yeah, do you want to quickly go over like what the 2 combos are? Because I know there's like so many different Hololive decks out there.
Yeah,
right?
sure thing.
And
So
throughout Springfest, people were really playing against more of the Rushia deck, I think. So
yeah, so the Kanata, it changes. If you're familiar with Nisekoi, it changes in exactly the same way. Where the 2/1/3K counter on the field, you sacrifice it when the climax is down, so long as you have a full field, and you play the Kanata from your hand. The Kanata, when she comes from your hand, heals. So you get a heal at level 2 along with your 10K. And then at the beginning of your attack phase, you can salvage 2 cards, and what of those 2 cards that you choose, whatever you don't add to your hand goes to your stock. So for every Kanata you have, every turn you play the stock soul, you can salvage up to 2 cards or stock up to 2 cards, depending on what resource you need at that time. So more often than not, because of the way the deck works, unless you're really rolling and you really won the board and you get to just keep going for like 3+ turns, which isn't uncommon. The deck runs a lot of tools to be able to loop, just like Rushia. You are going to be able to just add threats back to your hand over and over and over. Like I said, Kanata, small on offense, but can be really big on defense because of that 3K counter you're attached to. Like you're a deck that's running 6 2500 or larger counters, and you have ways to buff the Kanata to like 11, 12, or 12-5, usually sitting cross-turn and then backing up to 15-5. They're going to be looking to win on defense as opposed to offense after they get their Kanatas down early. They use that 1-0 Miko, which is a 6K clock encore that selectively clock encores from grave to like set colors, and they can do the fate play where like you play a master over a master, you play a Miko over a Miko, and you clock encore yourself infinitely to get yourself to whatever damage you need to, whether that is 2 or 3 depending on what you're playing against, to do whatever you need to do. But you cannot level lock them once the 1-0 Miko is on the board in any way. It's a mistake to try to level lock this deck in any capacity at any time, because they run so many self-clock effects and their resources are so fluid, as Kanata rips so much back and Marine is so efficient that kind of a fool's errand to try to lock them at any point. If the deck does whiff with Kanata, they do fall apart, but they have like 2.5, 3 levels to get there. 0, 1, 2, and 3. Like 0, 1, 2. Like there's a lot of time to get 1 climax. They have a lot of cards that help them get into there's 2 4-0s, and you're more often than not going to see double Kanata come down. And then after she's down, they're going to start picking you apart with their defensive counters, anti-change counter, tap counter. They're going to add them back every single turn that you're still at 2. They're going to try to grind out the game, heal down. They could replay Kanatas for just 1 stock because they don't really care about the hand. They'll just rip back more as long as they have the stock soul. A lot of these decks run the 2/1 Toa, which is on play, check top. If it's a level 1 or lower card, that card goes to their stock, so the card plays are free. It's a level assist, but it also has an ability where you can sacrifice it and hook one of your opponent's cards to front row. So when you're playing against, you know, stuff like Rushia or stuff like Standby, you win 1 lane on offense, and then you start dragging up your opponent's back row and killing it. Against Rushia,
you mean like a grappling hook? Or
yeah,
like
it's a grappling hook. Yep. So you can hook up their like 2/1 flare and kill it, and they can't play any more Rushias after you deal with other ones on the board. You can like hook up their 3/2 Roxy support, kill that. It gives a lot of like disruption once they hit 2, because again, it's something this deck can get away with because it can run a lot of 1-ofs. It can run a lot of these techie cards because it dedicates a lot of slots to like making sure it has a selection, because it has the same quote-unquote problem that people say about these TD focused hololive decks where they don't have selection. Well, you know, Kanata has this really cool card, the Helmet Kanata, which is like a double selective hand fix for this deck that they run like 3+ of. So they always have every card that they need time. And then again, they get to level 3. If they have 4 stock, you're getting triple Marine. They only need 4 stock to triple Marine you. They will get it. It happens every time. And if you try to level lock them so they can't do it, they'll overplay a Miko and cut themselves up to 3 and then play triple Marine. Because that doesn't cost any stock
and
to
the
do.
Marine does what again?
She's on play, sacrifice another one of your characters to check up to top 3, add a card to your hand, add a card from those top 3 to stock. And then she's on attack, pay 1, ditch a character, burn 2, gain 2k.
Yeah, so even if they don't get the Kanatas off and they don't like get a bunch of hand back for whatever reason, the Marine digs for her own card to discard if she needs to.
Or a climax. But like,
Yeah.
you know, you're gonna see the Kanata come down. I think a lot of things have to go really, really bad to not see double Kanata. Weird note about this deck, if we're talking about like counterplay and we're talking about each one of these. Kanata Marine actually like bolds really bad to like decks that run a bunch of zone bombs. Like if you queue
I was gonna say, like,
if you queue into Fate, you have a really bad time. Fate specifically, but Fate isn't very popular currently. But if you're a Kanata Marine player, the Fate is like the one thing you don't want to see, because they run level 0 bombs and level 1 bombs. Both your cards you rely on, your on death Rickies and your Miko, get dunked on by that.
Yeah, probably your best thing you could do against them seems like would be play a bunch of Adachis and stuff. It's like, again, like you said, that you run so many backups, you know, they're gonna beat you in power with their backups that they can salvage back off the Kanata, so they always have it. And it's definitely a combo that like the deck wants to use turn after turn, and each time they do it, it's gonna get harder and harder for you to win because they're getting so much clean stock or just infinite resources. So like having Adachis that will send, you know, hit their early plays to like another zone so they can't recur the Kanata infinitely, that's probably your best way to combat this deck.
It has to be a blue or a memory one though, because if it's stock, it's irrelevant. They'll get it out because it'll be at the top of their stock. They pop it out, and clock, they'll just heal it with another one and get another. They're gonna play like 2 every turn usually. Being able to get the other 2 isn't that difficult. The card only costs 1 stock to replay, and they've salvaged on the previous turn up to 4 cards to help them recur that card. So the chances that you're
if they're afraid of your Adachi, they just salvage another Kanata for next turn. Just set it up.
Or just, you know, they don't even have to salvage the Kanata. They can salvage like 2 utility cards, a backup to deal with like an early play. And then if they expect you to like Adachi another lane, they just grab the helmet back again. The helmet Kanata will just get it somehow, like wherever it goes. If it goes to stock or clock, like they're going to be able to get it out somehow. But yeah, even the deck is really, really resilient once it gets going. But there are things you can do. I don't think it's like anything super crazy. A lot of people don't even like this deck at all. They think this deck is like a lot more fragile than it actually is. Same as Rushia. It's the same people who doubted Rushia are also doubting this deck. So, you know, it is what it is. If you didn't like Rushia and you don't like playing decks like that, you probably won't like this deck either. But this deck's, I think it's a lot better than even Rushia. I think it's a lot more stable, because you're not playing for a level 1 into a level 3. You're playing from 0 all the way to 2, and then you have a finisher at the top. It feels a lot better.
Really double down on your end game.
Yeah, you're like
and
mid
it's really annoying too, like you said, like with the Miko that you can just like keep playing over to keep clocking yourself with the clock encore. Like the fact that you can't level lock them like you could something like say Love Live Sunshine, right? Like these decks that really crutch on their mid game with the early play combos. Like the fact that Kanata Marine can always just, you know, even if you tried to deny them, they can always just like force themselves to level 2 and start generating their card advantage with the Kanatas is like an extra like annoying thing on top of like everything else.
So many times I have drawn up for a quote-unquote second level 1 turn at like 1-5 and just decided, well, there's nothing left for me here, and I just cut myself up to 2 and just take the Kanatas from there. And it's usually the right play, and you can expect a lot of Kanata Marine players to do that, where like they'll get another level 1 turn and they'll say, well, game state dictates that it is best for me to be level 2, so I'll see you there, and they'll just take themselves up there.
Yeah, if you hit 2 before this deck and are able to stop the Kanata on attack, if you have a memory kit counters against a Kanata on attack, helps permanently remove it from the game and kind of keep it out. But this deck does, toward the end of this season, mid-October, when Premium Booster comes out too, it also helps solidify this deck even.
Yeah, this deck gets even more consistency tools. The ones that has right now are fine, but like getting the LaPlus is nice for color fixing, gives you a yellow option, and then the Bay is like just a better version of the Mel for digging for climax, just a better card. And there's a couple other tech cards as well that are just really good, like techie level 1s and you know, level 2s as well. That can be pretty good. Hololive's got a lot of good cards. I think you're gonna see a lot of it, no matter what build. But Kanata Marine, I don't know. I don't know exactly how popular this deck's gonna be. I hope more people are playing it because this deck's like really unique. Pilot, really fun to play. Unlike a lot of the other decks, which are pretty samey. Kanata Marine really stands out as a very, very unique deck that doesn't run a traditional like combo split. Any other thoughts on Kanata Marine before we move on?
I don't have anything else.
Okay. All right.
All good.
I think definitely pay attention to this next one though, guys, because quintessential quintuplets. There's so many fucking characters in this goddamn show, and there's so many different decks that people will play in this set.
Well,
Tell me about the standby one.
Yeah, the one that you're gonna see the most is gonna be 8 standby. You know.
This uses a lot of the new cards.
Yeah, it is. It is mostly new cards. So this is like the other big standby deck. A lot of people, myself included, is probably gonna think this is gonna be probably like the deck to beat in format. It is really good and pretty annoying, but in a different way as Mushoku. And I think it's a little bit more manageable for a lot of other decks, like weirdly than Mushoku. But the deck is like still incredibly because it does some pretty nasty stuff. Because Quince, once it gets its second set, which is today, actually, when it releases, I believe today is the delayed date. It has probably the highest like individual like card quality after set 2 across the set, because they have so many cards. And like Quince set 2 is like really modern. And of course, Quince, this deck also received a restriction ban on the most recent bit. So, you know, we're getting a really high power one here. So the big thing that 8 standby Nino does is that it's a standby deck that other 8 standby decks are like incredibly afraid of. And that's because unlike other standby decks that aim to build a big wall as quickly as possible, Quince doesn't build a wall from 0 into 1. It plays actually more traditionally, where it pushes more damage and attacks multiple times at 0 and doesn't really care going into it 0 and 1 because it will build a board later, and because of the way it's 2/2. Its 2/2 is a 7k on turn, 12k on attack, hand on core with nothing else. So it's going to swing in super big, going to clear other 2/2s, other 1/1s surely, even with Mushoku, even when they've sacked out a big board, and they have those like really nutty double lane level 1s, even if the Quince player somehow, you know, isn't at 1/1 or something like that. This Nino comes down with her climax combo. She stands herself, gains an additional 1k. They have a bounce back that gives that card 1k. You're looking at like a 13, 14k Nino that you got to deal with every single turn as an opposing standby deck. That can be pretty bad. And when you're queued against 1k1 decks, you know, like 8k, like hand on core, like just chilling out there, 2/2, that's actually good enough. You don't really care. To shore up those 1k1 matchups, and because of the way that 8 standby Quince typically takes it 0 into 1, instead of playing a traditional 1/1/7/5, the decks are opting to play a blue 1/1/6/5 unreversible by cost zeros. So that means 1k1 decks will have a considerably difficult time dealing with that card. That card will be practically invincible to level 2 for most of those decks, which will feed the 8 standby Quince players 3+. And then another cool thing that 8 standby Nino does is, because of the way their level 3 works, where you see that line of text, the first line of text there, this card's in Japanese, don't have the database update yet, or at least I haven't been able to get it yet at the time of this recording. It reads that if you have this finisher's climax in your climax zone, as lay down that standby from hand, this Nino gets the standby trigger in all zones. So if you trigger this Nino while you have that standby down, you get a standby trigger, and it's not a climax, so you're not making your stock dirty, and you just added 4 more climaxes to your deck, 4 more standby trigger to your deck. So because you did that, and you're able to shuffle this card back into your deck with your card that pops back to hand, you can mill your first deck. You go to level 2 on first deck, and you mill your deck down to 1 with a good mill tools deck as available. You shuffle back 2 of these Ninos, and then you get 3 standbys in 1 turn, and you have an unreversible board that you write out for the game with all the typical 2k to front stuff and 1500 global cards, stuff like that. But yeah, it's really hard for other standby decks to like deal with getting their board beaten down every turn, and then after they've beaten down their early game board, then they build a really big board. They also have an anti-soul counter from level 2-3 onwards. It's not a true money counter, like that is in you can't deal damage, but it gives -3 soul. It does target, so hexproof gets around it. And then you have a bunch of different, different defensive counters from different girls in different sets. There's a lot of weird ones. There's like a burn counter, there's a memory kick, different anti-change counters of every different cost type. And then all the way at the top, all the way at the end, there is the 3/2 Nino finisher herself. End of attack, pay 1, ditch 1, burn 3. So swing for 2, burn for 3. And then they're 3/2 each back row. Every time they summon a card to the field with standby, they can give a lane a soul up to 3 times per turn. So you are able to set up side attacks, things like that. Any other thoughts?
I think, I have a couple thoughts. You know, like you said, like with the Neg Soul counter, that gives a lot of sustainability to the deck, I guess, like longevity, you know, lets them really grind out that level 2 game. But do you think, I think Bang Dream would probably be like a good counter to this deck. If you're having trouble with 8 standby Nino, maybe try Bang Dream, because the hexproof on the Chew 2s probably is a really nice way to deal with that.
The bracelet, yeah. The bracelet, I don't know. I've been playing this deck quite a bit to prep for BCS, considering it as a deck that I may or may not bring. I've actually like gone down even lower on the bracelet. I'm playing like 2 copies, stuff like that in most of my lists, because it's a nice to have, and you do push a lot of extra draws. They have a card like Ironwood, where like it's a check top and then a ditch draw. So you have a lot of ways to like push extra draws to make sure you get into a lower count of events. But the deck's actually just so nutty with the way that it can always kill everything, and then the second it hits 2, mill down and just put out this gross board. And the Ichka, after it's down, is just giving you like all this pump, and you have all this top check to confirm like extra triggers, where instead of Twin Drive like Mushoku, Quince gets a lot of on attack, like choose your trigger, like choose one of 2 and you have to mill the other. So it has ways to like get into additional triggers, almost as Mushoku does. But
yeah, I don't think cutting the bracelets, like trimming down on them, like you said, is like I don't think that's a bad idea at all. Like it's one of those type of cards where the threat of it is almost
enough to force sides and stuff. Yeah,
your opponent tries to play around with side attacks. Like the threat is just as potent as you actually playing it. And then like even if you don't play the counter, you have more resources to use for the finisher on your finisher turn.
They also have a lot of really cool tools, like the 3/2 Ichka, which is a card that you can stand by, which has a like act effect where once it's on board, it's like a 3/2 9/5. You can like pay 2, rest it to burn 1, and then that card pops back to your hand to exchange itself for any other Quince in your hand. So you can use it to like play the 3/2 Nino finisher from your hand as an early play at 2 and like get heals alongside like your traditional early play heals. And then the 3/2 Nino like swings in at 12/5 base before anything else. It's even bigger than the 2/2. So like it gives you like a crazy mid-game power spike too if you want, like in terms of damage, where like this card can just come out of your hand and like heal you and push damage with like a standby that you were gonna slam anyway, which is really nice. That card is like super sick and does something that like, you know, the other standby decks really aren't doing, where like it can exchange itself for another heavy card that you can like actually sculpt for. Because, you know, the Quince is a modern deck. You have like really good sculpting tools. So, and I think it's really nice to be able to have an 8 standby deck where you don't have to like play a super slow, like incredibly methodical 0, where you're worried about like getting shot up or shooting up your opponent in terms of damage, and like you literally just go like unga bunga, roll your face on the board, drool on your mat, and then you just play the standby, and the Nino rips herself out of grave and stands herself, and then you go, yeah, everything's fine, and you just play for that big shuffle back power spike, and you don't even care about hitting refresh timing because you'd rather hit on first deck. You have your wolf big grave standby out to the board with shuffle back. Yeah, the deck's really strong, probably even simpler to play than like other standby strategies in terms of like, you know, standby is not very intuitive, but like once you get it, like you put out the big body, and it can really bully down a lot of those older sets or the mid-tier or lower sets. But I think the big thing with Quince is if a lot of people move to playing 8 standby Quince, I do feel like because of the way the 2/2 Nino works, it's almost easier for that like mid-range like second string deck to deal with, because it's not putting out like an entire board of 9/5 power like Mushoku. It's got like maybe a 1/1, an AK 2/2, and maybe an unreversible, which like is annoying, right? But like that's still a little bit easier to like at least win a lane or 2 than it is against Mushoku.
Yeah, yeah. As someone who plays, I don't play a ton of standby myself. I like the 1K1 decks better, and like when I get matched up against the standby decks, you know, if I'm able, anytime I can like reverse one of your characters and not lose one of mine, because you'll probably hit over it next turn, but you know, the way that 8 standby pushes damage, right? Like the meme pushing damage, you know.
Yeah, open lanes.
You need the open lanes. So if I can hit over you I know I'm not getting your card off your field. You're obviously gonna fucking hand encore it, but at least like I make you use a resource. I still trade you 1 for 1, making you you have to spend the card from your hand, you know, to save your card rather than you just doing whatever you want and swinging for extra soul. So, you know, the fact that you're only big on offense probably gives you the edge against other standby decks. But against the 1k1 decks that, you know, usually you would maybe be able to prey upon, it does give them like that little opening where they can kind of, you know, they can get hits on you. They can force you to use your resources.
Yeah, at least
you and
at least
throttle your damage by having bodies to block.
At least in the early game, once Quince hits like 2 and forward, they put out just as big of a standby board as anything else. But until then, you have the opportunity to play a little bit more of an early game as opposed to a deck like Mushoku, which is like grinding the game to an absolute
the early
halt.
game is where it counts the most. A lot of times, though.
A lot of times, yeah.
If you lose, because that's like the one time in the game where 1k1 decks can at least trade board with standby is like at level 1 with like any sort of pump effects they have with their level 1 combo with the power from the climax. You know, you can actually like trade resources with your opponent before it gets to the point of inevitability where they, you know, eventually build their god board and you aren't able to deal with it.
Yeah, I think that's interesting about the deck. Go ahead, Tanner.
Again, once that level 2 spike does hit, I think the fact that the Ichika back row also is so like giving those soul pumps is so versatile and so helpful to allow them to play around everybody's, like all the taps, all the anti changes. Like it just provides so much value that if you're not able to really set them back, which is not easy to in this with how this deck works and how quickly they can put their board out, it makes it so that defensive counters can still threaten, but essentially they don't do nearly as much as they would against like Mushoku at level 2.
Yeah, you could shuffle back to get a soul, play a standby, give a soul, and then you're top checking on attack for, you know, another soul. You're like siding for 2 against 3s. Like pretty normal for Quinn, I feel like, if you have to.
Yeah, it definitely gives you that like extra versatility that other standby decks don't when it comes to pushing damage as well.
All right, we can move on here. A deck that Tanner and I know and love very well, Korone Rushia. We have Korone here. You could play this deck with any other voice combo. You can play it with the Watsume if you want, but Korone is a lot better because this deck needs selectivity. I talked about it. It hits specific stuff for all of these ED mid-game focused hololive builds. So like Kanata Marine that we just talked about before, if you don't know about this deck, we also have a deck tech for it on the channel. We will have links to samples of all these decks we're talking about. These big meta threats here, they will be descriptions. Check those out. So this one's another mid-game focused deck, but it plays a more traditional 0-1. You play a normal level 0 into a normal level 1 combo, and then you go from there into your Rushia turns. So the way Rushia works is play the pants, and you can either shuffle back up to 4 cards into your opponent's deck and salvage a card, or summon any hololive character from your waiting room to your field and give it 2500 power cross turn. And there's a Marine that works off that can heal you when it comes from the grave. So it can either be like a heal and a body to win board, as well as this card being very sticky with being like a 13k base with the board that you need to play her with having hand on core, or just, you know, an absolute blowout. Shuffle back, obviously, it makes your opponent have to mill out their deck all the time. They can't leave 1 card because then you shuffle back 12 and then opponent dies instantly. Got that absolute blowout factor that Kanata doesn't really have, but it's a lot more dependent on hitting these specific pieces, and because it plays from a 0 into a traditional 1 and then that 1 sculpts for your pieces, you weirdly have more opportunities to like whiff getting your stuff than you would as Kanata, which is why Kanata has been more so catching on, because it's a equally powerful but different kind of mid-game power spike. But Rushia Toolbox is a lot more than you think, because you can summon any card. There's a lot of cool things you can do. Again, the shuffle back can just be a blowout if you're not playing around it, and they play that same suite of defensive counters, anti-change counter, tap counter. They play it all and they can add it back to hand. And the deck steamrolls just as hard, just in a different way. It's either keeping itself on board, bringing in more Rushias for even bigger turns when you play more pants because they have more loop stuff going in, or bringing out tech cards that'll dunk on you in other ways. I'm gonna let Tanner go here if he has anything else he wants to say about the deck. We both played this deck in Springfest.
Yeah, one thing that I really like and that I've been kind of playing around with is the fact that you have so many options. Like Hololive being such a big set, and the fact that Rushia spawns any card, you don't have as many restrictions, and it allows you to play a lot more tech and a lot more like niche options. Things like the Rushia 3/2 green bomb that's colors from hand. Like that card alone, it'll clear anything that your opponent has on board. It'll refund itself with it in hand. It'll fund the stock. So like if you there's just so many different options and different like techs, and there's a like that top end has a lot of versatility to test different things. It's just, I think that this deck, if your opponent ever doesn't have the ability to mill out, you know, if they leave a small deck and they just, no matter what they do, they have to, you either force them to waste a bunch of stock and overextend, and then maybe not have as strong as a follow-up turn next turn because they had to survive and it cripples their just resources, or they just leave themselves to be blown out. I think just that threat alone keeps this deck relevant, even when people are still trying to like go into that more higher ceiling that I think Kanata Marine has, and with the higher floor, I mean, that Kanata Marine has. I think this just has so much ability to just steal games, blow your opponent out when they just get in a weird, unfortunate situation, that it's something that you always have to be aware of, and it makes all decks that you're trying to play, no matter what they are, have to have a lot of deck speed. So if you're playing something with low deck speed and you queue into this, it's going to be the worst time for you.
And even this deck specifically, because of its colors, can run the Subaru Azusa. So it has a lot of deck speed like kind of baked in, because they need all that dig to find all their pieces, to find a specific level 0, specific level 2, and then the Rushia itself. You have to have all those ready. And unlike Kanata Marine, you have a lot more time to get those pieces together. You're like trying to find your dogs, and then your dogs are trying to find your other pieces. Things can go wrong in that kind of play pattern.
Yeah, I think Tanner meant more so like on the opponent's end, being able to like, you have to make absolutely sure that you always mill through your entire deck. And
yeah, you can't leave the one card.
You know,
you're done.
I think like Tanner said, like the ceiling is really, really high on this Rushia deck, and the floor is really, really high on the Kanata deck. So it's like, you own HOLolive and are thinking about like what you want to play. You know, if you want a more like floor focused deck, you'd probably go for Kanata. If you want the big blowout potential and the super high ceiling, you'd probably go for Rushia. But I will say this, like as someone who has not, I don't own HOLolive, I have not played it, but I played into it a whole lot because everybody in Pittsburgh owns this set. But like, even when you're prepared for it, and even when you're like, you know that you're playing against Rushia, sometimes like it's a really good tournament deck because your opponent will sometimes just oops into it and just forget that like, oh crap, you know, I didn't mill out my deck all the way, now I'm screwed. So like over the course of a long day where tournament fatigue sets in, like the Rushia deck's still a very real contender, I think.
Yeah, I can speak to that for sure.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think definitely, especially like it was really nice in trios because, you know, having that major ceiling is super helpful, and you know, you're not as worried about your floor because you have, you know, your team to kind of help assure it. But even then, I mean, this deck's not, I'm not saying that the floor is like low, it's still extremely doable.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
by no means. HOLolive has extremely premium card quality.
Yeah, you have a ton of selection. I mean, the only piece that like your Subaru can't grab is your level 0, is your Brainstormer. So like you have that if you don't hit your dogs. Like you don't need them because you can use your Subaru to grab your combo pieces. I mean, you have, you know, tons of selectivity. I just think that the fact that this deck allows you to benefit off your opponent like messing up just one turn is the difference between like if they accidentally leave, you know, a small deck and, you know, they only have they're all out or anything like that, you know, you can spawn the Marine to push damage on top of that, like shuffle back 8 spawn Marine swing per game. It's definitely something that, you know, knowing your deck, knowing this is here, and making sure no matter if you look at your deck, you say, if I'm mid deck or below and I'm, you know, low on climax, I gotta find a way to get through this as fast as I can.
Yeah, it's just a death sentence if you oops into a Rushia field.
All right, I think we can move on. Again, we have deck tech stuff for almost all these decks, or we'll at least have sample lists or links to other great channels deck tech on these decks that you can watch to get more in depth on like specific tech cards specifically. So moving on, we got Door Pants Danmachi. So if you really hate standby, this is what you want to play. If you really hate standby and you don't want to play 8 standby Nino, you can play this. You can beat over almost any board at any time. We were talking about the Door Pants 12 event deck. The 1-0 Bell, if you have all the Firebolts in your grave, can hit 11-5. It can beat down even the highest of high rolling MTI boards. So 8 of those 12 events are basically functional additional copies of Bell. And the Pyeongki, when you play it, if you have a Bell down, you can send them to 15-5. It's 1-0-55. Like, come on, that's insane. That's a lot of power. You can kill pretty much anything. The way the Torch and the level 0 Hestia Brainstorm work, you have a lot of deck control and filtering power that you can fire off every turn. You can kind of quote unquote better player your way through a lot of games with deck control and just staying on top of your deck state and getting a lot of stock compression, because pretty much everything this deck does is either stock light or stock stock free. The Hestia event Rize that you play can stun big standby cards that come out to your opponent's back row if your opponent is trying to play passively to sort of answer your bells, because you know they'll lose their front row. If they stand by that big card to front row, they'll try to play passively, put that big card in the back row, and then you'll stun lock it with the Hestia as you filter your hand for more events so that you go off with bells again. Bad parts about the deck, really bad level 0. Their best level 0 is a level 0 bell where you pay 1, punch yourself in the face, pop itself and another level 0 back to your hand so that you create open lanes after hitting yourself so that you can escape level 0 as quickly as possible, because that's how bad it is. So that you never have to experience it for more than a turn cycle, so long as you don't cancel literally everything your opponent throws you between 0 and 1. The other big thing with Danmachi, after a lot of personal testing and things I've seen other people talk about and whatnot, when you play against other 1k1 decks, this deck doesn't really do a lot. If you are not able to sort of win through your compression and deck manipulation, which again, like, that's a gamble. That's like playing like Old Fate, where like, oh, I should cancel. Well, you know, Weiss isn't a game of shoulds. It's a game of reacting when bad things happen. So, you know, that's not going to be a super consistent strategy for you when you play against other 1k1 decks, because when you don't have big power and you're not cracking down on standby's board every turn, where they have a lot of time or have a lot of trouble putting that board back out, you're not really doing a lot, especially when the 3-2 Hestia finisher is so lackluster, like a pump a soul in a lane and then give that lane cancel burn 2, which isn't pushing much damage at all and isn't doing much. At least it can play around some defensive counters with some side attacks. But the other big thing with this deck, and a reason why, even though it's a really popular anime, why I personally think it might not see a lot of play, it's got a lot of moving pieces to keep track of. And if you're worried about like stuff like time, like going into turns, or maybe just like messing up over the course of a really long tournament fatigue, there are a lot of game actions and a lot of things you got to keep on top of. And if you're not going to play against nothing but standby, that is like a big detractor from like you maybe playing this.
Yeah, I've played a good bit of Danmachi myself as well. If you want to see a deck tech for the Dwarf Pants deck and just like a really good, I think really discussion on all the different decks in Danmachi, we have some.
You can gush about it. It's one of our most watched videos on the channel. You can gush about it.
Oh shit, really?
Yeah, it's up there. Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway, like there is a lot of triggers you have to keep track of. And you have to really be on top of that stuff. Like I come from playing Magic. That's my background. So there's like so many like triggers that you like really need to be on top of in that game. But Weiss players, I've found, really just tend to like hand wave these things and just kind of like be really relaxed and loosey-goosey about it. But like if you miss the timing on your Hestia Brainstorm to be able to draw and discard or something, make sure you have this timing down. You know, you resolve the event first and then you do the draw discard. And it's only on the first time you use the event. Don't get a judge called on you because you just forgot that, you know, you had to like line up your triggers a certain way. It's just something else to keep track of over the course of the day that most other decks don't have to deal with. You know what I mean?
Yeah. All that being said, this is still like definitely a meta threat. It fulfills its niche very well as the 1k1 deck that every standby deck would hate to sit across from, no matter what. Even 8 standby Nino doesn't want to sit across from Danmachi.
Yeah, it's a very good anti-meta set for the standby power-focused meta that we're currently in. And I think it's a very strong choice to take tournaments too, because even if you're not hitting into standby matchups, like you said, where you're like really favored, even against non-standby decks, against other 1k1 decks, you still just spin your wheels really well. The level 1 combo, the bell, is completely uninteractive, and still gives you access to really good reactive deck speed tools with the torch, which the level 1 combo will get for you. Yeah, and you do a lot of healing, and you can just get them with the finisher. Like you can just Weiss them out when worst case comes to worst. But the deck is very like self-sufficient, or like non-interactive in a sense, right? You can choose to interact if you want to beat over their standby boards, or you can choose to just ignore them, crash over their field every turn and keep trading resources with the bells, and then go for a triple finisher turn.
Yeah, my whole thing was like a triple Hestia finisher is worse than like a triple Marine or something.
Oh, for sure,
that.
100%. But
yeah, she's not definitely doesn't push as hard. Yeah, she is efficient. She's efficient because she's free and she's a stock killer, so she's definitely not using a lot.
Yeah, what I was getting at is more like, your finisher doesn't have a ton of reach. You don't have blowout potential with your finisher like the Hololive decks does, but you're kind of capitalizing on riding that wave from the early game with your bells. And even if things go south, you can just slam triple finisher and maybe get lucky because it's Weiss.
The card's so light, and you save so much resource and you have so much deck control. You can probably play the card like pretty defensively and just being like, okay, I'll throw some damage out because this card heals, and my deck state's still good, and it didn't use any resources, so we'll just do it again the next turn, and just like multi-turn your opponent in those 1k1 matchups. Probably what you should be trying to do. All right, we can move on.
You have anything to add, Tanner? Or?
Yeah, no, I think you guys covered it there pretty good. I definitely think that any standby deck that sees this has to, know and expect your board to be killed, and then the person playing this, make sure you really know your lines, because speed and making sure you don't get timed out and lose here is important. So make sure you're on top of your deck, and I'm sure anybody who wants to play this will practice it and be consistent at it, but it's just a consideration is making sure that you're able to do that as fast as possible.
Yeah, you don't want to be the turn 0. Pretty damning in this game. All right, last Hololive deck here, Memory Hololive. This can also be kind of a catch-all for these decks ending in Marine that maybe don't run the memory package, but Memory Hololive is definitely the most popular of those kinds of decks. So it's the most traditional deck. You run a normal level 1. Korone is the most popular. Could be any choice trigger, again, could be the Wattsmate, doesn't really matter, but we want the choice trigger to sort of shore up our stock cost, because we're going to use a lot of stock to generate memory. We're going to use things like the Polka Ramirez to fulfill our 3 or more differently named character memory condition that we can spam out our early plays. You have the 3/2 Polka and Suisse, which have deck state independent early play condition. One being memory Polka, and this being 4 more board. We are going to heal like 2 times every single turn after we hit 2 for 3 stock every turn, and then we have 3 to 4 stock at the end of every turn, right? So what's really good with that? You slam down Marine and then you get them. This one is pretty simple. It's going to use the same strategies that we talked about for the past 2 ones where we talked about Hololive a lot here, those last 2 decks, but it's going to use that to just use its resources to heal and spin its wheels in the mid game and then kill you with Marine. Most traditional deck. There are versions of this, quote unquote, that cut the memory engine for better level 0 or end game stuff, maybe like the big event that can like burn you for 4 twice, stuff like that. But they lose access to a lot of heals because again, Marine doesn't heal, but they might have a more threatening top end or run like weird tech. So just pay attention if you run into a weirder deck, but most of these other Hololive decks are going to be memory. Memory was pretty popular even during Ringfest as well. So just something to think about. Any other thoughts on memory, Tanner?
No, I think it's pretty
simple.
It's not going to have it's normally doesn't run as many of those big defensive counters, so there's always the threat of them, but typically this style doesn't run it as much. This is another one that I think gets a lot better when you can run the Laplace, because it helps you with that yellow color. So once premium comes out those later tournaments, I think that's a big benefit to this deck. But overall, I think it's solid, it's consistent, everything's super efficient. They run on very low stock because they don't need it to do every action they need to get there. They only need about 4 stock and a couple of hands, so not really a deck where you're going to strand them too much. But if they whiff memory, if you bomb their level 0s and you don't allow them to send all that to memory, and you force them to overextend with their Ramruses a ton, and that's kind of the weak point of this is it's not often, but when it does happen, it's very hard to try to salvage the game state.
It's kind of weird talking about that, like a memory deck, because like people see it's like, oh, traditional, but now that I think about it, it's definitely a deck that plays Ramrus with a auxiliary combo as opposed to a deck that plays a combo with Ramrus, right? You're gonna play like really hard into that memory stuff because they have to hit that condition, make sure that they can spin their wheels with heals.
Yeah, not seeing any of the Nenes early. There's a couple of things that helps make this more reliant on Ramrus, just because again the memory card quality isn't on par with the rest of Hololive in general, like at the 0 line. So I think it makes it slightly weaker at that point. But again, you're so efficient, you heal down a ton. I think this deck is pretty much like I think this is like the replacement to like the Door Pants slime. I think it's
it plays pretty similarly, just better cards,
efficient and better.
Yeah, better cards. All right, we can move on here. Got a couple more.
Yeah. I had one other thing to say about Memory Hololive.
Oh yeah, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I think part of the appeal of this deck, like overall, is it's probably like the event package, or not the package, but like running the event to burn as a supplement at the top end. I'm not wrong in saying that, am I? Like the choice door deck. They would a lot of times run the burn event.
They would run,
right?
Well, no, they would run the burn event if they don't run any of the memory stuff. That's a little bit more uncommon, but it's like the same deck outside of that. They just cut the memory stuff to support the event and play choice door raw. I've seen that a lot, and like some of them play the event as well. level.
So
It's
just
like
because you
a
see choice door doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be like
memory. It might be
memory
good
hall
stuff.
live. They could just be running a more good stuff deck with the burn event at the top to like help supplement their finisher.
Yeah, I saw that
Hololive
quite a
doesn't
bit
really
out there.
have like, generally speaking, doesn't have like a ton of damage push at the top, but you know they might be running a build that has the event in there as well.
It's just Marine, or if they play like Coco,
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that.
That's all I had.
Okay, we can get, got a couple more here. Choice based Bang Dream. I have Choice Pants up here, but this is really any Bang Dream deck that plays the Choo-Choo package. And in fact, it's so important for Bang Dream in the modern day that I have put the Choo-Choo package here instead of any combo that could represent Bang Dream. Because I'm going to be honest, without the Choo-Choo package, no one would care about Bang Dream at all. The Choo-Choo package is just this massive hexproof twin drive body. It heals. You can't deal with it. The other body has hexproof. It's just disgustingly massive. If they double Pareo, this thing's like a 15-5. You can't touch it. It's disgustingly large. The big reason that Choice Pants is the deck that people play most often is because the Nanami processes 9 cards on first deck so that you can more reasonably hit your refresh timing, because Choo-Choo is a 2 or less early play. And if Bang Dream whiffs its Choo-Choo timing at the top of its second deck, they completely fall apart and they really struggle to play the game and have to mill out their entire deck again, try to loop their level 1 combo to just try to get a chance to play Choo-Choo. Because without Choo-Choo, they aren't doing anything. Bang Dream, obviously, they still have access to the 2-1 Buns for Luck stock swap and the 3-2 Fumio. Not all builds can accommodate both of those cards at once, but builds that can, specifically 8 Door, if you play against that deck definitely can. It's important to just stay vigilant, be on the lookout for that. That can really kill you. Same as like Konosuba, if you remember playing into that can just completely delete you from anywhere. And if they're playing Choice Pants, the Mashiro is pretty efficient and can attack you a bunch of times like 8-Joint Slime, especially with the Brainstorm that they play that can like summon one for free without paying stock. So just keep that in mind, that even if they might be, you know, strained on resources, or it looks like they are going into level 3 from spamming a lot of Choo-Choo, they can still pump out a good bit of damage. Not as much as Marine, but still a good bit. That's about all I have on Choo-Choo.
Yeah, Bang Dream has a ton of, like you were saying, they have a ton of tech options. You know, maybe they're running the Buns for Luck, maybe they're not. Maybe they're running this event, that event, the Fumio tech card. You know, there's a million things Bang Dream can do. It's very much like, I think Konosuba is a very good comparison, where there's just such a broad card pool that they have access to. You know, definitely don't assume that every Choice Pants Bang Dream deck is exactly the same list. Like, make sure to, like I said with like I said earlier with Mushoku, like make sure to you know, take stock, take inventory of your opponent's graveyard before they go to shuffle their waiting room back into their deck.
They could have all
Refresh,
sorts of
just, like,
wonky stuff.
Yeah, try to like see like if they have their like pet card or like whatever event card that, you know, maybe not all Bang Dream decks run, but maybe your opponent is running it. You know, make sure to like kind of stay on top of that stuff and check so you know if it's something you need to worry about. And then the other thing I wanted to mention too is that Bang Dream just in general is really good at just spinning its wheels and not really caring too much about what the opponent does. And I think that you mentioned like every single, you put the Choo-Choo instead of the finisher even for like the on the slideshow, because Choo-Choo, it's just the best early play the set has access to and is like a very relevant card in the current metagame. If you're looking at other like high tier decks, like being hexproof is really good against a lot of stuff, against the decks that are running tap counter and anti-change counter, which are like the most popular types of counters to run right now. With standby decks, you can kind of like ignore that because of the hexproof on here. To an extent, you gotta like kind of watch out for tap counter still, but they can't like anti-change this. So that's definitely a feather in Bang Dream's cap. Not to mention just randomly just having good matchups against stuff that like has to target your characters. If it's something like, if your opponent's trying to like be really anti-meta and run something like an 8-win Sword Art or something, they can't target this with their win triggers because of the hexproof. If your opponent's playing RWBY, they can't target this with the finisher because of the hexproof. So like you get some percentage points there. It's the Choo-Choo and Pareo really like bring the whole deck together. You have a really strong early play healer package at level 2, and then you have infinite amount of tech, and you know, you can run whatever level 1 combo into whatever level 3 combo you want.
I think there's something to be said for people playing a card as garbage as Nanami, to put this card on the board as consistently as possible.
I hate Nanami.
Yeah, I think like after playing with that card like extensively, that card is absolute garbage. The fact that card has to ditch a music character is like the worst feeling thing in the world. You literally can't even fix for like bad game states. It's like so terrible. But people run it anyway because it has a choice trigger and it gets you to your next deck without dedicating a ton of slots to events and stuff like that. So like there's something to be said that people run that card to get this card out because this card's that good. And the deck put up tons of results. Bang Dream was up there. It was part of the trifecta super team of Mushoku, Bang Dream, HOL Alive. That was like the best team that you could be playing in Springfest.
And this is kind of like the one early play spam strategy that's still kind of relevant, right? Because like
outside of HOL Alive,
the hexproof and big power that get with you too is totally worth it.
Yeah, outside of HOL Alive, this is like the only real other one I think that you're worried about or building for rather when you're considering other decks. There are things you can do to deal with it by getting rid of the Pareo first. You have ways to remove the Pareo because the Pareo is what gives the Choo-Choo all of its abilities.
Yeah,
but that's still an additional. That's still an additional hoop you have to jump through. Sorry, Tanner.
No, you're good. Yeah,
it's still like an additional hoop you have to jump through. Where like, let's say you have wind triggers, right, to deal with it.
You'd have to trigger two.
You can't just target the Choo-Choo. You have to like go out of your way to target 2-1 first. Or and a lot of times outside of wind trigger, there's really not a lot of ways to target back row. If this Pareo's just chilling in the back row,
yeah, it can
and you
really kill you.
Like an assist, you might not be able to get rid of the hex on the Choo-Choo.
Pretty normal play at Springfest was Pareo in the back, double Choo-Choo to the front in the matchups where it mattered.
And that's what I was gonna say is like if you think like the Watame and HOL Alive, like that only dunks front row. So as soon as the Pareo is in back, it's immune to that, and then you're gonna keep your Choo-Choos on board forever. So there's like that alone is like a massive advantage to this.
Yeah, Choo-Choo's insane.
I do have a question for you, Tanner. How does this interaction work with the I think it's the Polka? It's like an early play in HOL Alive that like lets you double level down.
That's the IMA.
The IMA. Yeah.
IMA.
They target simultaneously, so you won't be able to target both a Choo-Choo and that Pareo.
Yeah, it doesn't work.
You can still level down the Pareo,
and then they hand encore it.
Right.
But because the Pareo is on the field, because you have to declare both triggers up front, the Pareo is still giving the hex.
Correct.
And she still has hand encore, so you'd be griefing yourself pretty bad with that one.
Which also mean like you also can't target it twice. Like
yeah, you have to target two separate cards.
So it doesn't. There's really no stopping this card once it's in back row with HOL Alive, unless you play the Toa to pull it up to the front and then kill it. But then again,
and then remove it somehow. You'd have to kill it. You'd have to drag it to the front row, then dunk it, and then kill the Choo-Choos. Which again, like you did so much more and had to commit so much more to deal than what your opponent put into this. Which again, without Choo-Choo, no one would care about Bang. This is the card propping up the set.
It really sounds like to me like if you're not playing like one of these early play decks, if you're not playing one of the big standby decks, or you're not playing Choo-Choos, you're not playing Kanata, like you better have some Adachis in your deck.
Oh yeah, I mean the mid game is the new.
That's the only way you're dealing with a hexproof Choo-Choo.
The era of the mid game, man. This is where we are at the era of the mid game, level 2 and onwards. All right, moving on. 2 more decks here. Want to talk about RWBY real quick. It doesn't really matter what the level 1 is. If you're running 8 standby, you're running door, you're running choice. It doesn't matter.
For me, you're running bar.
Yeah, you can even do that. If you really wanted to.
You probably don't want to, but
you could. Look, we like Penny, but her card's pretty bad.
I love Penny.
RWBY is the reason you're playing this set. When everybody's playing these defensive counters and everybody's taking up on board, you know what's really, really good? Block kicking your opponent's card and burning 3 without ever going to attack phase. And it begins and ends there. RWBY also does have a lot of tools to like crack down boards with like choice and door combos at 1, or like build boards with standby if you're playing 8 standby. If you're playing like split standby or 8 standby, you can like build pretty nasty boards with the Pyrrha, and the Pyrrha can shuffle back up to 5, kind of like a mini Rushia. And then if they have the Jean out there too, the board can get pretty big pretty quickly. But the big thing to remember about the RWBY is just because she dodges those defensive counters and like she activates without going to attacks and stuff like that, she still doesn't push a lot of damage. That's a guaranteed 1 and then a swing for 3. That's like nothing. So if you're not a deck that like really crutches on those defensive counters and you have other things that you can be doing or other things you can be preparing for, you're not really too worried about the RWBY unless you're really crutching on that defensive. So as long as your deck has like other options, I think the big thing it like really dunks on is Mushoku because they crutch on it so hard. But like even Quince or HOL Alive, they have other things they can prep for if they know you're building towards this that mitigate it. But the fact that you just completely dodge it and the set is like pretty strong overall is like a reason to be playing it. And of course they have Neon Cat. Never forget about Neon Cat, especially if you play HOL Live. Never forget.
Neon Cat's a motherfucker, dude.
That they have Neon Cat. Never forget.
If you're sitting down against RWBY, you have to respect that card in the early stages of the game when you're trying to set up. Like,
card's gross.
Depending on like what type of level zeros you're running, if you're running just like you want to open with a one of runner, right? You kind of have to like question yourself on that. Like, what if they play a Neon Cat, or if you have a on reverse combo, it popping back to hand is also no bueno there. But yeah, I think you bring up a really good point. Like the Achilles heel or like the weakness of the RWBY deck is that the finisher doesn't push a lot of damage. It reminds me a lot of like Konosuba's finisher they used to run, the Megamine that like clock kicks and then burns for. But
they just don't have all the push. Yeah.
With like triple Megamine, you used to be able to like triple Megamine would threaten a kill very nicely because if your opponent was at 3-0, like the clock kick, and then one burn 4 sticks kill them. But with RWBY, you know, even if you triple RWBY kick, and then you need to stick 2 of those 3 burn 3s, right?
Yeah.
It can be tough to like actually get that final point of damage to like finally finish them off. Like if your opponent hits level 3 first and like they heal down and play their finisher, and you get a chance to crack back with your rubies, like it's really annoying when you triple clock kick and burn for a bunch of 3s and they cancel like 2 of the 3 3s and then they just untap it and kill you with vanilla swing. It'd be very disheartening.
Yeah.
But in the meta game we're in, this is a very strong pick for sure. I think it's like the pinnacle of anti-meta decks right now in Weiss. Having like the RWBY combo at level 1 or the Jean combo, whatever you want to run at level 1, you can kind of either ignore or just hand wave like whatever standby stuff your opponent's setting up at that point of the game because you're either hitting over it or just dodging it. And then no matter how big and how oppressive your opponent's board gets at level 3, you don't have to ever worry about having to like swing over them or anything. You don't have to worry about Paul and Mushoku Tensei like burning you for damage back when you like attack him. You're not even attacking. You don't have to worry about tap counter. It's a very convenient deck to play in that sense.
Yeah, I think this and like Danmachi are like the big anti-meta picks for sure.
Yeah, and again with like the cat is so oppressive against certain decks. Like if you go second or going first against RWBY, a lot of the time like you're just gonna have to lose play an extra card. And
if I sit down as Kanata Marine against RWBY and I'm going first, I'm putting 2 cards to the front row on my first turn.
Same thing with memory. I mean, it's just like
you can't afford to lose it, especially with memory because your cards are too small, right? Like cat will actually just kill them. Like so, yeah.
Yeah, I think if you're playing RWBY, and you want to like really make it far into tournaments, you really want to grind that level 0. Level 0 game. Like you really need to like know your matchups with that, know when Neon Cat's good, and know like how to react to certain situations. Seems like a deck where it's like very easy, or not easy per se, but where you have the very real potential to like level lock your opponent or like screw your opponent over really hard at level 0 by like answering like their one threat that they opened with, right? There's so many decks out there that have to like mull so hard for their openers, and like we all play Weiss. Sometimes you just mull your entire hand and don't draw any zeros. So if you're able to like Neon Cat,
I know
one thing they did draw,
happened to me in finals.
If you can like sniff it out and really like slow play that 0, that can just be free win city.
Yeah, it's Neon Cat's gross.
Neon Cat alone.
Like know how to play with Neon Cat if you're using RWBY, and know how to play against it if you're not playing RWBY.
If your opponent doesn't maul anything at all and you have no idea what they're playing, it's so terrifying if you're going first, because if they're just playing cat, I mean, you don't want to overextend and play into it. Like, and if they're not playing RWBY and you just play 2 cards and nag yourself one for no reason, it sucks. But at the same point, like, RWBY's just such a scary card. Cat.
Okay, I got one more here as a big meta threat deck. Sorry to everybody who thought that they were going to hide this deck from us, that we weren't going to be able to cover it. I might not know your specific lists, but I know the basics, and that's enough to share it with everybody. So let's talk about dual laner TRV.
Europeans on Discord, you can't hide from us. You know what's up.
So this is a bit of a rogue deck. It's been rumbling around social media as a possible top tier contender. It was covered by a couple channels. Darcy from Australia, WCC, and Nendo went over this, specifically the Chifu 1-0 part and how that could work with the deck. Not specifically the dual laner part, which Darcy went over, but another big part of that deck and why it can do it too. So, do you guys remember Love Live Superstar and how that deck worked in JP? So, Love Live Superstar was a deck where you had all these tools to amass a bunch of resources while, you know, clocking yourself a bunch to make sure you hit 3, and then you played all these cards that did things in main phase where you just kind of stacked your opponent's deck, and no matter what they did, you always killed them. It was kind of like it was like a magic combo deck in Weiss. And this is kind of building to be the same thing. So the way that it works is this 1-0 Chifu is a dual laner. So dual laners in Weiss are cards where when you only have 2 characters in the front row, they get these OP abilities. The ones in GGO, they got a bunch of soul and they blind stocked at the beginning of your attack phase. The ones here are a little different. The Chifu specifically is if there is only 1 or less other characters in your front row, and it does not specify which cards that has to be, so it can be an extra copy of himself, you give all the characters in your front row on attack stock a card from grave. So if you have 2, you generate 6 stock in 1 turn. And what you can do with that is you can abuse something I'm going to call a damage inequity. So what that is you are only attacking twice every turn, and if you don't trigger one of the 2 soul triggers that you play, of which you play 6 typically, 6 of these salvage split souls and 2 of the pants here for the bludgy at the top. If you don't trigger any of those, you're only pushing 2 to 4 damage maximum a turn, as opposed to your opponent's typical 2-2-2, 3 swings, even on the higher end, 9 damage per turn. But you're generating more resources than it on average. So you generate all these resources while keeping your opponent at low damage. So they never get to level 3. You can very easily lock them at level 2, and you, similar to Kanata, have a lot of abilities where you can cut yourself. Your opponent is attacking you multiple times to make sure that you get to level 3 with 14, 15, 16, 20 stock. And with 15, 16, 20 stock in Tokyo Avengers, you can do some pretty disgusting stuff. You can play this 3-2 Mitsuya in main phase that mills top 2. You run a lot of triggers in your deck and burns your opponent for the amount of triggers you mill. That's a main phase mill you can do. You have the 1-0 Chifu in the back row, or 1-0 Mitsuya in the back row, where you can rest that card you just played and any other card on your board to salvage a card and then pop that card and play a card of it again, get deck speed with a 0-0 Baji. You have a lot of ways to like convert your like stock resources and mill and get the cards that you need to make sure that you always have all these cards to go off. And you can do disgusting stuff like a couple Mitsuyas in main phase and play 2 of the kids meal Mikeys on the wings and a Baji in the center, and you get like on attack burns with the Mikeys and then the Baji, which turns into another Mikey, and you ping 1 a bazillion times, and you can kill your opponent from like the 1-6 to 2-1. Like, just ridiculous stuff. There is stuff you can do if you have a way to clock yourself to 3, like Kanata to play stock swap, or you have a level 0 stock swap like Kaguya or Slime, where you can really dunk them in the mid game because they have so much clean stock, because it's not blind stock like old dual laners. This is guaranteed clean stock. And they have some kind of weird ways they can save their stuff. They have a level 0 cat bus style card where they can save one of their dual laners to the back row, and there's not much you can do about it. So just make sure that they're, making sure they're getting hit for more than they're hitting you, and they're always generating more resources. And they're naturally keeping up handed resources because they're only attacking twice a turn. So it's a pretty unique deck. A lot of rumblings and deck hiding and other stuff going on in the community, or this deck's rumbling around. But I really just wanted to share it because it's very, very unique. And when these kinds of decks don't have holes and answers to keep them in check, like we saw with LSP, Love Live Superstar,
yeah.
These decks can be really, really disgusting and force emergency bans and all sorts of gross stuff. As we know, that deck in Japan got banned not once but twice and had to have a card central to its strategy completely banned, which is pretty rare in Weiss Schwarz these days. They don't outright ban a lot of cards. They've done even things like Kurumi, as egregious as that, got limit 2'd. Sumire was banned entirely. You can no longer play that card in any capacity. So just something to think about. When decks like this are good, they're gross. So I do not have my hands on this one yet, but I know a couple people that do, and a couple people are testing, and the prospects are good. And Andy also does. That I was going to end with that. I don't think you played the specific build yet. You played a bit of the Baji.
You know, I love the Australians. Who's the one who came up with this again?
Darcy didn't come up with it, but Darcy was the first one to publicly cover it. Because a lot of people have been rebelling about it. Yeah,
I'm very glad he did, and I'm very glad that I was able to like discover this build. I'm one of the only people in Pittsburgh who's actually like bought into Tokyo Revengers probably, and I've been like messing around trying to make the Baji finisher and the kids meal combo. I've been trying to make that work, and everyone is laughing at me and thinking it was just a joke. But I'm glad that it's not a joke, and I'm glad that someone else, you know, found out about the dual laners and really went all in on it. I was kind of like playing an 8 pants build, just like some dual laners slapped in. But this mega build where you kind of just like go all in on generating a shitload of stock, and then have I like how you phrased it, Carmen, like a Magic the Gathering style finisher or combo where like it's like, okay, you know, my opponent didn't have the interaction with me this game, and now I'm just gonna set up all my pieces and then knock them down.
Yeah, it's like a traditional combo deck. Like when you have it, they die.
Yeah, because you're unlike a lot of other like big wombo combo finishers in Weiss, where it's like, oh, whoops, my opponent randomly hit 3 first, so I lose, or oh, whoops, I accidentally ate a whole level of damage, and now my finisher's pretty good, but I can't push that much damage. You know, the dual laners kind of help supplement that issue, because throughout the game you are only swinging with 2 cards. You're kind of like sandbagging your opponent the entire time, meaning you're not accidentally gonna like knock them up a whole level and then just like die to their finisher. With only 2 attackers, it's a lot easier to set up side attacks to make sure you're not over pushing damage in whatever way you want to, but still generating that much resources. So I think in theory the point is your opponent is never gonna like get to 3 first and just nut on you.
Yeah, it's abusing.
Like you have complete control over that. You make so much stock, even though you haven't pushed as much damage over the course of the game because you have only been attacking twice per turn. You still just get to like go into your final turn and say, okay, I have 22 stock. I'm going to play this. I'm just going to keep playing over and over again these the one level 3 red card that like mills 2 and burns you when you play it. And then just after I'm done burning you repeatedly during main phase with this card, I'm going to then just set up the Baji combo and then just burn you out with that, which is insane.
Yeah, I think that it's abusing a part of the game that you quite literally in almost any other set outside of Tokyo Revengers and Love Live Superstar have never been able to take advantage of, which is using damage and equity in your favor, where by locking your opponent out of doing their top end, which is the only way they can possibly kill you, you generating more resources than them while dealing less damage, kill them for sure. It is a foregone conclusion that they will die if you get this stuff off. And when that stuff is consistent and super good, it is actually incredibly toxic and terrible to play against and creates a terrible meta. So there are 2 things that can happen here. This deck is really good and everyone goes out and buys it because TRV is dirt cheap right now. Everyone go out and buy it and play it so that Bushiroad has to address it, or there's some sort of answer to it in the meta and the meta shifts to answer it so that it can't run wild. But this is Weiss Schwarz. It's hard to stop your opponent from doing stuff. So if this deck does turn out to be as good as it is and puts up all these results and it is this gross and you can't do anything about it, because like we've been talking it over with a couple people over the past couple days, the prognosis ain't exactly very bright for like dealing with this. You know, sitting across from it has not been a very good experience and not much you can do about it. So in those cases, those decks really need like reined in, but like we'll see. I think it's cool. I think taking advantage of a damage and equity is cool. That is a cool niche. A true combo deck. It's very different from what people in Weiss are used to, but we will see. Will the boys fly too close to the sun? Will boys have to be banned? We'll see. Weiss Schwarz ain't about boys, unfortunately.
I feel that's not. I feel very much that like again, as someone who comes from like playing in Magic the Gathering formats with tons of combo decks, right? Decks will pop up from time to time where it's like, oh, here there's this really insane combo that can win on turn 2, on turn 3, or can just like set up this insanely like god board, right? But I think it really comes down to, like you said, you know, what is this? Is this just a flash in the pan, or are these Discord games that we've tested just, you know, the deck high rolling and just like some, you know, initial, you know, good results before the, you know, other decks can adapt, or, you know, maybe we're just high rolling here, right?
Yeah.
But then you get to the point where this deck starts picking up steam, right? How does the format change around it, right? Is there an answer that can develop that is able to answer this sort of deck? Another thing to mention too is the consistency of it, right? Like we're saying with a deck like this, right? Yeah, maybe you get the ultimate win condition where it's like, yeah, I have like 1 billion stock and I can deal a ton of burn damage and you're never gonna hit level 3 and you're never gonna threaten me, ha 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 ha, right? But how consistent is that? Or are you gonna be able to set that up every game, or is the fact that you're just swinging twice per turn and eating shit from your opponent and them outpacing you the entire game up to that point, does that make it?
Yeah, will you run out of time?
How consistent is
yeah,
it? Right?
will you run out of time from like experiencing that damage and equity before you can take advantage of it? Because you need to generate really 15, 16 stock to guarantee a kill.
Yeah,
like 14 to 16.
Like, it very much seems like when you're able to, if you're able to do what you want to do with dual laners and set up your ultimate combo, you know, then you're just chilling and you're gonna destroy them.
The one way that I think,
can you make it that long? Can you last to the point? Can you survive attacking for only 2 attacks for so long before you get there?
I think the way that they'll get away with it is refreshing with somewhere between like 9 to 12 on average stock on first deck, because they do have a lot of deck speed with the Baji Mitsuya package that Nendo goes over in his video. You can basically loop it infinitely to like ensure that you can always get through your deck. So if they can refresh and these disgusting deck states that are guaranteed clean, that can be used to ride out into, you know, canceling a lot of damage. And if decks don't have mid-game stock swap, which again, the decks that have mid-game stock swap are the decks that aren't looking too hot right now outside of Bang Dream, and Bang Dream's got to play red to play Buns, which like would be a deck building pivot for them, because all these other decks, we're talking like Choku, Hololive, believe Vince doesn't even play theirs. Ruby's is also level 3. These are level 3 only stock swap decks, and if you never see level 3, you can't play your stock swap. So the only deck that could play that would be Kanata Marine blocking itself to stock swap you, which is only one of you know, so many decks. This is also kind of susceptible to tap counter, but you know, when they have so many resources, does it really matter? You can even double Baji.
They can start like siding attacking.
No, dude. You could double Baji. You could double Baji in this deck.
You can't double Baji.
No, you expect one to get tapped. You play entirely for one Baji to get tapped. Yeah.
Part of like, you're stunning your opponent's level 2, right? Like you're trapping them at level 1, at level 2. They're not able to get their highest level cards on the field, so you're going to have side attacks set up. You can just side attack with your 2 Mikeys the first time, then just swing normally at their Baji. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like you're gonna have built-in ways around it.
Open lanes throughout the game where they're going to have weak characters in them, because you're only swinging with 2 things. You have open lanes. They're going to probably have like level 0s or weaker cards in those lanes, and even in their lanes where they're beating over your dual laners. They're still probably at a lower level than you. Even against a standby deck, you're probably not giving them a lot of time to set up like their god boards, because you're trapping them at 1 for so long, maybe, right?
Yeah, it could be. Like, I think it needs a lot of testing, and we need to see how it actually shakes out.
Yeah, like
I would be worried about running out of time, like if I can't get a good first deck refresh and like things don't go very well, because like TRV also has a lot of self-clock stuff. So if you hit that good refresh and you're like chilling at 2, even if you are canceling, you can like loop enough self-clocks to get yourself to 3 to go off.
Yeah, even without the dual laners, if you're running just like the stock Ricky, I don't even know what to call it. The one Mikey that
the
like,
free the
stock when you
Takamichi that gives you just a free stock, and then there's a Mikey that's like block a card from hand, check 5, and then there's the Hina Ricky. Like you have a lot of ways to do stuff. And this deck can even pivot to do other stuff too. You have all this stock, right? That same play pattern you can use to mill out your deck
with the 3/4 counters from the.
Well, no, not even that. You can heal loop infinitely with the Hina and the 1/0 Mitsuya back row because the Hina sacks off. You can like play the Hina, sack off, rest the Hina, rest another card, grab another Hina, like sack off the original Hina, heal again, tap it down, grab another Hina. Like you can just keep going for like one stock each and like continue to heal until you run out of hand. And then if you're super compressed by having a lot of stock, just brainstorming, get your hand back. Like you can just keep going because you just get free salvages and can like loop it over and over again. So like there are a lot of things you can do with this. I'm excited to see what happens. I went out to TCG Player and bought it. If this sounds any at all interesting to you, hop out to TCG Player and buy it before this stuff spikes to the moon because TRV is pretty god darn cheap right now. The only expensive card is the Hina early play. So go out there and get y'all some TRV cards if this sounds like something
interesting. I don't want to like scare people though. Like I feel like we might be coming off as like doomsayers saying like, oh my god.
I'm not even dooming. If it's
Love Live Superstar, oh no, run.
If it ends up being as good as Love Live Superstar and puts up that good results, Bushiroad will take care of it. I don't think it's anything to be afraid of. Like when things are that bad, the company steps in and takes
yeah. Like again, I hate to keep bringing up
action.
Magic the Gathering, but like coming from that game, it's like combo decks pop up so often. You play, and you've been playing a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh on like Master Duel and stuff lately, Carmen.
Oh, but that game's all combo all the time.
It's just like new broken combos will like pop up every once in a while, and like during the first week when they're discovered, they seem like, oh my god, this is unbeatable, But then like sure enough, time goes on, people develop answers for these decks. That sometimes these combo decks can have natural.
It's a little bit different
to them.
It's a little bit different in Weiss because we don't have side decking and we don't have a best of 3 and like
we don't have side decking and we don't have best of 3. But the fact that for this deck to really, really pop off, you have to go multiple turns with the dual laners. How does that inconsistency affect the deck over the course of a long tournament, right? Like
it's to be seen.
Individual Discord games being like, this is insane, But like, how about in like an 8-round tournament? Can this deck?
We gotta see.
Enough through that.
We'll see that. We'll see this weekend. Maybe someone will break out with this because I know plenty of people have been hinting it and talking about it. I'm so sick of everybody being secretive about it that I just want to dump it. So
but it is very exciting. It is like the first time.
It's very cool.
Long time
it's like
something like this has come out. Love Live Superstar was even kind of like a bit of an anomaly, right? Because like it was using a promo card that
at the beginning, it used
every set.
It used the Shioko promo and then moved to not using it afterwards because people realized that the deck could still be played and was still super turbo broken. So Bushiroad just took care of it. No longer play it.
From what I understand too, Tokyo Revengers has been out for a while in Japan, and this dual laners deck is kind of like now being discovered.
It was played and tested very briefly. Tanner, go ahead.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It said that there were some like older lists that you could find on Twitter from like right when Tokyo Revengers came out for that little bit, but I don't think it was definitely different from what a lot of these like hidden lists and like things have been looking like.
A bit more primitive, a bit more less refined. Maybe.
Yeah, I think it's the fact that they just gave up a little earlier than I think a lot of people here have been trying.
Well, so the trigger lineup is also just completely averse to how the Japanese player base prefers to play the game, where they see 6 to 8 salvage split souls and say, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. It doesn't matter how it is. They don't care.
I'm a screeching eagle, brother. I'm gonna go in there guns blazing. I'm gonna fucking slam these 2 souls. I'm gonna get the ultimate kids mill. I'm very excited to testing this. Yeah.
It is what it is. I'm excited to see what it does. Again, when these decks are really that good, if it ends up being that insane, the company will step in and rectify it.
Change of pace
it is
all the heal spams and standbys.
It's
nice to have like a deck
like
this.
Andy, you're gonna say that until you sit across from this deck one time, because let me tell you, it was never fun to sit across from Superstar. So be happy for now. You're the only person who has it in Pittsburgh until my cards come in.
I will be happy.
You got to
live it up as long as I can.
You got 4 days until my cards get here. So
I have 2 days for the rest of my stuff to get here. So.
Damn it. Only 2 days. But no, it's cool. I think if this unique deck is even half as good as we're like doomering about it is, and then you have like Kanata running around, that's enough different stuff to keep the meta spicy enough, I think. Because I think before this deck like sort of like, you know, started rumbling up.
It was just all standby.
It's all standby. It's all board.
But now
Kanata is the only Kanata is the only different play pattern deck of like any of these other decks. So
yeah, it's nice that there's like a good mix now. You have like the early play heal spammy decks. You have like the setup decks where you're like just like trying to set up your Kanatas and like let them live and then just nut value. And you have like your big wombo combo finisher deck, which is something that was kind of like not in the meta for a while there. You know, the format was very defensive slanted, and it's nice to have another good like aggressive deck in there.
Well, I wouldn't even call Dual Laner aggressive. It's like these are
combo,
like its own thing. These decks
I mean.
are like their own thing when they're good. So like we'll see. I'm excited, but we will move on. So this is the other thing here. We'll talk about this as much as Tanner and Andy want to. So this was kind of my idea here. I took the recent tier lists that have been done both by the Clock Tower and the Darcy and Jason and Kevin from Strictly Broken and Darcy from WCC did a combined tier list for like English like BRO+BCS like going forward. I took those, kind of mixed them together. We talked about it a little bit before the stream, maybe moved a couple things around, and then what I did was I took these sets and I plotted them against like sort of perceived popularity, like where we expect these decks, like how popular are they, whether that be popular to like be played. Do you see these decks played a lot despite their strength, or they are popular and strong, or things like that, or maybe they're really popular but not very strong due to like franchise, or they came out recently, something like Tokyo Revengers, where it's the most recent release set, except for Quince that came out today, which is not legal for play this weekend and stuff like that. So I just thought it would be cool to plot the power, or like, you know, the perceived strength of a deck against how popular they were, and just sort of see how it looked. So we got all this stuff up here, these decks that we just talked about. The only deck we didn't talk about over here being 1K1 Quince using the Itsuki, the 8-door deck. I think that deck's pretty good. They talked about it on the Darcy X SBDCG tier list if you guys want to listen to more about that, but that kind of represents all those 1K1 Quince decks. But yeah, you can see everything we just talked about up here in this top right corner. We have this line here, this line Tanner asked to be put in, where this line represents like a significant gap of about like an on-screen inch, and then everything else, and like Fade is like right on that line, and like Love Live Sunshine's right behind it. So is like there anything specifically anyone wants to say about it? I thought it would just be interesting to look at this now as sort of like a projection, sort of like a prediction, and then once we have actual stats, shout out to Weiss Tea Time who compiled all these stats for Springfest and stuff, and people who will be compiling stats in the future. I know a lot of people do. We can come back with stats not only on popularity, but also when we have a better idea of what the actual like tier list is, since a lot of this is speculative. Come back even after AOT and stuff is out, and then actually replot this when we have a lot of data and not a lot of speculation. But I just thought it would be something cool to look at.
Yeah, I don't think for me there's anything specific to call out besides, you know, I do think that between like that line and to the right are significantly different than the rest of the decks. I mean, it is Weiss, so there's always that opportunity for any deck to win on any day. But I think when it comes to the tools they have available, you know, whether it be just overall consistency and card advantage you can get, having that massive board, just the resource generation with the massive finisher that we talked about with dual laners, I just think that it's such a gap that hasn't really been as noticeable like in past, where these decks are by far and away the decks that are going to be played more consistently than everything else. And I think it gives you a massive advantage to be playing one of these versus anything, you know, left of the line.
Yeah, I know, like, I know me and Carmen have been playing a little longer than you, Tanner. But like, I know, like, when me and Carmen started playing, it was more like, I would say, like, the difference between the top tier and then everything else was a bit smaller. But I think for the first time in, like, you know, a very long time, it seems like there's a big gap between, like, like the contenders and then the everything else. And I think we see a very clear trend of that with like the two highest placed decks here are like 8 standby Mushoku, 8 standby Quince, right? And then we have Rushia up there as well, which is also a very big tanky deck on field. And then some of the other decks that are like kind of running that up, you have things like Danmachi and RWBY that have very good tools to contest like big boards, right? So there's like a very clear trend here, and it very clearly defined like what is like kind of running the format right now and what is like being used to counteract that, per se. If that makes any sense to you guys.
Yeah.
I hope I wasn't trying to be dismissive, Tanner. Like,
No.
I didn't mean like you've started playing more recently, but you've been grinding tournaments and like getting results and everything. You know, I'm not wasn't trying to like.
No, absolutely not. Yeah, I fully agree with that. I mean, from my personal experience, I mean, when I first hopped in, I think it was Dow, and then like Dow had a pretty big lead, and then it got looking more so now. I think it's even greater of a gap than it was then. I think just looking at Mushoku versus Dow when they were both in there, like when Dow was in its prime, like you saw heavy results, and I think Mushoku's doing the same thing. And now I think Quince is on the same level. I think these Hololive lists are very close behind. I think just the quality of the cards of these like newer sets, and they just keep the power creep is like showing up really seriously nowadays. And I think this is like this chart and kind of showing that is a good way to kind of talk about it.
Yeah, once we get some real stats and stuff, it'll be cool to come back to it.
For sure, yeah.
Plot it out for real.
I think it's going to be really cool to see how the game develops going forward too, because I guess like looking throughout like Weiss's history, right? Like we've had before the whole like Data Live scare, right? Where Data Live was the big standby boogeyman for a while, right? You had things like Attack on Titan and Love Live Sunshine that had been like tearing up the format for years, just like with their insane offensive pressure, right? And then we kind of had like a gear shift and kind of went into a more defensive format where you have like these 8 standby decks. You have like 8 standby Data Live, 8 standby Mushoku, 8 standby Quince, like really like running their respective formats. Is it not just a matter of time before they just start printing more aggressively slanted cards again, right? What if the new Attack on Titan stuff comes out and it's like, oh my god, it's like Mikasa 2.0, it's the most broken finisher ever.
It's
right?
Power creep and aggressive stuff is somehow like, I don't want to say it's worse, it's different, because you can look at JP right now and it's D side. That's like the aggressive
something
meta.
Crazy like that's super, like pushes a lot of tempo and a lot of aggression. Like what's the next step for the game, right?
We'll have to see.
Like it's probably going to be like, it's going to come in like ebbs and flows, right? Like you're going to
AOT
going to swing too far one
and
way.
Atla, man. AOT and Atla. We'll see what they do. It's all up to the English exclusive Avatar.
Oh yeah.
We'll see what they do. I think RWBY was like a massive success. Like it didn't do it. Well, it kind of did it immediately, but it did exactly what I wanted from the English original, where it was either going to be something that was so good that it caused other decks to care about it, or it fulfilled a niche so well that it was good enough to fight against the other decks. And it did the latter, which is fine, but we haven't seen the former yet. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see the former maybe one day.
It's very cool to have an English exclusive set like RWBY come along and really give English format, which is kind of we've branched off into more
JP Light
decks as well, but like we really focus our content more on the English side of things. And to see a deck come along that really shakes up the format, and RWBY is a deck that really, in Adventure Time, I guess to a lesser extent, really give the English format its identity, in a sense. We're not just JP, but a year later, right? We have additional things that we can like have our own sort of meta and ecosystem with, right? RWBY is like a very strong anti-meta deck that they never had to deal with back in like the Japanese format of the game. That's a lot more advanced, I guess you could say, than we're at now, right? With stuff like B-side, right?
Yeah.
So having like strong differentiators, like really separating the English format from the Japanese format is very interesting, and definitely coming up too with like the English exclusives. Who knows what Avatar: The Last Airbender is going to be? That could be anything, right?
Yeah, we have no idea. It could be anything.
Deadly Sins.
Yeah, that's
Seven Deadly Sins 2. 7 Deadly Sins 2 is going to be, I completely forgot about that. That stands an incredible chance of like being a blowout set. 7 Deadly Sins has such good bones. Like it has some strong super solid cards, like high floor cards, it could easily be a blowout deck. Because I'm not even talking about the Meliodas. I'm talking about stuff like the Chaser, like the double combo package, like utility cards. Like it has like those good bones cards, and like nothing really crazy to show for it except for Meliodas, which gets dunked on everything in the format.
But yeah, like a lot of the top tier decks, right? They're just kind of like, I don't want to be dismissive, but a lot of times just like you know, we kind of like the English format follows the Japanese format in a sense, right?
Yes.
Like we get Mushoku Tensei, we start playing that standby deck. The Queen Set 2 comes out, all our decks change and like shift towards that.
The only time in our brew history where we've also, like in the past, where we've really held on to a list that Japan didn't was like Book Stocksoul ReZero was not popular and not played in Japan to the level that it was in the West, like by a considerable margin. But other than that, in terms of, you know, how long LSS and AOT have stuck around, obviously because LSS being unbanned and AOT not having, you know, the modern cards to stop reverse denial from being such a big part of why it was so strong, ran rampant for so long. But like that was like really the only other time. But now I think with these new things coming, if not already, we can say that our format is you know, it's at the, if you want to be as pessimistic as possible, it is at least JP Light Plus, like, which is more than we could have said in the past, right? And that's a good thing, and we're trending upwards, so that's good. Any other thoughts on this before we close up here?
Nope, that's it.
All right, okay, so before we get out of here, I know it's been a long one already, I want to highlight some other content creators who made some great BCS Bro related content, or maybe not specifically content for this upcoming season, but content that is very relevant to the upcoming season. So obviously the Clock Tower, we talked about them a couple times during this video here about bro stuff. They did a really cool top tier meta deck matchup video where they went through a lot of these top tier decks, like 8 Standby Quince, Mushoku, a couple Hololive lists, and then highlighted things that happen in their matchups with each other and how those matchups go, and sort of broke those all down. That was really awesome. They also have their own tier list, sort of a meta preview, and then also talked about a couple times the SPTCG, Kevin and Jason X Darcy from WWDC, their 2022 looking forward English Weiss Schwarz tier list. The VOD for that is on Darcy's channel. We'll have also all of these linked in the description. We were talking about Tokyo Avengers. I talked about how Darcy showed a version of that dual laners list, and then Nendo talked about the 1-0 Chifuyo specifically. Both are great videos. Definitely give those a look. And then if you want to see a lot of these decks in action, Precious Collectibles has some of the best gameplay footage out there because they have a really cool setup where you can see both players' hands as they play, where they're hidden from both of the players, but the camera can see them. So it's a really cool way to watch Weiss and see how matchups go, since you have full hand knowledge while you're watching the gameplay. So that's pretty cool.
Tress's Collectibles, I wanted to shout them out too. They put their Fate Grand Order stuff out a long time ago, their deck techs and everything, and I know when we did ours, I kind of took some inspiration from the deck tech they put up there. So if you're looking for more Fate Grand Order, like a good choice door deck list, check them out. I know Clock Tower did one too, actually. I watched both of theirs. I took some inspiration from both their lists, actually. Yeah, and just in general, like we're definitely looking to put out more deck techs ourselves too going forward here. Keep an eye out for we'll be putting up some Tokyo Avengers deck lists in a little bit here. I still want to get out like the Fate Grand Order, like the other decks for that too, like the bar deck and the choice deck and all that.
Yeah,
we just got to get everyone together to record.
A lot of stuff we still got to do. More set reviews too. I mean, we finally gotten caught up, but like these English exclusives are going to start coming out. We got AOT pretty soon, and then after that, just more and more stuff. They're always looming. Hopefully, after competitive season wraps up or dies down, be able to actually make the rush rundowns instead of a video like this that kind of condenses it all. Something more specific to each set, highlighting the big threat cards and all the things you got to play around. Make sure you can play into stuff effectively. Real compressed 10 minutes or less content. Like Andy said, more deck techs, more content on the horizon. Maybe other cool stuff like this. Maybe some updates of how things are happening. We plan on attending a lot of events. I know for for specifically Chicago and Toronto, there will be a big Pittsburgh presence. So if you're going to either of those, definitely come find us. It'll be cool to see y'all and hang out. So definitely.
We'll see you at the Erie Zoo next week.
Oh yeah, shop
At the water
challenges.
exhibit.
Yeah, we are driving up there 2 hours for a
They
shop
don't have
challenge.
giraffes. There's no fucking way they have giraffes in Erie.
That's what I told Tanner, but yeah, whatever. Tanner unfortunately had to drop out, but he sends his regards. But Andy, I think that's it. You got anything else you got to add?
No, that's it, guys. Definitely check out some of these other videos on these other channels too. We're not trying to hog all the attention here. You know, there's a lot of really good content out there, and we're really happy that people care so much about this game that we love that they want to make content for it too.
Yeah, it's awesome. All right, with that, Pittsburgh Weiss Schwarz signing off. We'll see you guys in the next one.